to all the dispossessed youth of Africa, for perpetuation of communion with ancestral spirits through the fight for African freedom, and in the firm faith that the dead, the living, and the unborn will unite to build the destroyed shrines. Selah. Hello and welcome, beloveds, to another episode of Ask Dr. Mumbi. My name is Dr. Mumbi Saraki. How you doing? How's everything going? I really do pray that you are well in all your ways and that you're moving into living life truly on your own terms. We really want to thank every single person that has subscribed to the channel. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. And thanks to everyone that supports us on Patreon. We appreciate, love you so much. Don't forget, you can always email us, drmumbi at drmumbishow.com with your questions, and we usually take, the one that's most popular. This particular question, though, came from my Patreon family, where 2 or 3 of them have actually asked me to talk about death. What is death? How should we regard death, especially because it is about to become a major theme in the world. Not me saying it, but a lot of people are just going to be checking out stories for other days. But so they wanted me to just get into what is death. And the important thing to remember, beloveds, is that we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. And as I've said, this is our vehicle and our license to operate here on Mama Earth, on Gaia, whatever you want to call her, the turtle planet. This is our vehicle that allows us to transact, to interact, and to use our mental and spiritual energy to influence this world. That's basically how it happens. You have to use a body, or you have to have a body to do things. And basically, beloveds, when we're born, it's like our spirit enters the mother, the fetus or whatever. There's many people who say it happens at different times. There's some who will send, there's some God beings who are here. This may be too advanced for some people, who will literally send like sitting spirits, like a lower, many would say a lower version of themselves, but they'll send a certain, a spirit to kind of experience the earth, and then and kind of transact on their behalf. And then when they're approaching their destiny mark, they will fully come in and bring all their attention here. So maybe they'll only send like a part of their soul. This is really deep. But basically, when you're born, your spirit enters this vehicle, and then you have to learn how to work within this vehicle. And then once you learn how to, to speak, to walk, that's what the whole childhood thing is. And then you're supposed to learn from nature. But Babylon has totally turned everything upside down and back to front by capturing you at that time, separating you from nature, and then teaching you what they, about their world, their artificial world, the world they've created, not the real world. Because at a certain point, nature starts to teach you. And and the way it was before is our ancestors and the ancient ones, they were aware, they could see both the spiritual and the physical world. So it was literally magical. It was like Avatar vibes, higher than Avatar vibes. And so they could see all the different, animals and beings, like the fairies and the dwarves and the dragons that people think is all fairy tales. That was their interactive world. But those vibrate on such a higher level. So the more our vibration as humanity lowered, the less we saw physically. And so the less we thought was here. When everything is here, there's dimensions. The dimensions are not outside of this one. It's outside of this reality. It's like there's this world, and then there's many layers to this world. And you start to realize that when you start to walk into different dimensions. And when I talk about dimensions, maybe I'll do a whole separate show on that. Because there's the dimensions of the Babylon reality. There's the dimensions of the dimension of the new world that's being created. All of them are right here. There's the dimension of Egypt and Kemet back in the day, because time is something that they created, stories for other days. So that's the birthings thing. So when you leave, it's literally your spirit now checking out of the body and leaving the vehicle. And what is supposed to happen at the moment of death is that there's supposed to be certain rituals where you bestow, people back in the day, our ancestors, and not so back in the day, even as recent as my grandmother, they knew when they were going to go. They knew their time. They could almost tell you the day. And they would almost be like, you know what, I'm going to sleep. I'm going to sleep now. Like, peace out. It was a very peaceful thing. They left in their sleep. And they would leave their vehicle, because it was time. And we lived for hundreds of years. Some lived for thousands, beloveds. That's how they became gods on earth, stories for other days. So with death, basically what happens is you spiritually check out of your body. So physically, you're no longer here. But if you haven't done the necessary spiritual work, or if you've gotten stuck to a low vibing narrative, then you will either create the next chapter for yourself. Like they've told you, about hell and heaven, and you feel you were sin or whatever. You will create those scenarios for yourself, and you'll end up literally in hell or in heaven. Let me just warn you that heaven is cold. Heaven is hot. It's hell that's cold. Stories for other days. And so you check out physically. And so before, you would leave here both spiritually and physically. And you'd either ascend, which means go to a higher level experience, or you'd go back to your home, or you'd go into a waiting room, if I can describe it that, or a boardroom, where you'd meet up with your guardian angels and everyone who played a role spiritually in your experience, and you would plan the next thing, because the whole thing was about building Mama Earth, expanding her, bringing our energy, and being the children in the minds of the gods, beloveds, and manifesting all these worlds. And so many would reincarnate several times, and then we don't come alone. So you'd come with your soul group. So when you leave, you're checking out physically. But what you need to be more aware of, and this is why I keep saying work on yourself, is that you're also checking out spiritually. You're leaving spiritually as well. And it's so important to understand that, beloveds. And what's happened now, why there's so much confusion, is that a lot of spirits are having premature death. So their death is not natural. It's not happening at their natural time. So then their experiences, their lessons, their great works that they have come, here to do are being aborted. Some didn't even get to start it. So they're being aborted, beloveds. And then because a lot of people are not spiritually aware, they will leave physically, but they think they're the physical. And so they're stuck here spiritually, beloveds, looking for a body that they can re-enter, because it's a reincarnation cycle. Let's take a short break. We'll be right back. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. Wake up, Africa. Welcome back, beloveds, to Ask Dr. Mumbi. My name is Dr. Mumbi Saraki. I really hope I'm not being all over the place with this one, because death it's deep, and yet it's so simple that most people wouldn't even get it. And it's the spiritual transformation or transition that many should be focusing instead of the physical death. And you see, many are leaving physically before they know themselves spiritually, or before they connect properly with themselves spiritually. And so it's creating this perpetual return, where then they want to come back, or they hang around spiritually, because they're so attached to their physical bodies that they literally can't move on. But then now they have the bigger perspective, because they're seeing everything from a spiritual lens. And so they're like, oh my gosh, you mean this is what it was always all about? But death should not be looked at as something emotional, and they've made it like that. And the reason we feel so much pain when a loved one dies is because we have a misunderstanding of what it really is. And also because we're not in touch with our spiritual world. I don't want to say, well, us, to the peoples, when their loved ones die, they really do die to their consciousness. They can't see them, they can't connect with them anymore. Although several people have been reaching out to me saying, there's a woman who reached out to me and said, her husband had passed on, but she felt his vibe around her, and she really felt that he was pushing her to kind of find a new relationship and move on and not be stuck. And I feel like that's what happens, is like sometimes when you release the body, if it's not a trauma, because traumas create black spots, even in the spirit and in the mental, and with spiritual and mental beings having this human experience. So if you die a traumatic death, that can make you get stuck at that point where you can't move on, because there was a fragmentation of your spirit. And so when you left fragmented. And the only way to kind of gather yourself back together is if someone would do like a spiritual ritual for you and help your spirit to come back at that scene, at that place, in order to be released. There are so few spiritualists now. So many of you email me asking me about spiritualists, by the way. And I just haven't been called to do individual work like that. But there's a lot, beloveds, that when you start working on yourself, you'll start to recognize. And maybe we as a collective are gonna get there, because there's so many souls that are stuck, beloveds, that desperately need to be released, and they're only released through overstanding. Death doesn't take you nowhere. It's the understanding and the overstanding of life that really takes you somewhere. And because many are in a false narrative, they have, there's a danger that if they have not created the necessary spiritual connection with their higher selves, that they could get stuck and end up in the wrong place. So if you're too brainwashed, if you believe the narrative too much, if you're too deep in the religious psychosis, that will trap you in a whole mental world. You'll be stuck either in a fake mental heaven or a fake mental hell, until your mind and your consciousness can come out of that. You see, that's why the mind is everything, beloveds. The mind is the spaceship that helps us navigate our way and graduate and get from one world to another. It's not this physical. So that's what happens when you die a traumatic death. Your spirit kind of gets stuck there until it's brought back to brought back into unity, because of the fragmentation. But when you die a peaceful death and you've been working on yourself, then you're able to transition. And this is your last run. This is your last life cycle. And there is a story that was shared with me, and I think this is the best way to describe this as I end this segment. If you want me to get deeper into this, please give me, specific things that you'd like me to touch on. But there's this story that I heard from an elder, where he talked about how, a Christian and an African spiritualist died. And their spirits were, they said, after you die, you're like at this crossroads, like let's say like a bus station or something. And then your ancestors will come for you. So one of the ancestors, came for the two men who were related spiritually. And one of the men was like, "Oh, great ancestor, thank you so much for coming to get me, all praise, like, yeah, and let's start." And then he approached the Christian and he was like, my beloved descendant, we're here for you. And he's like, "No, I'm waiting for Jesus." And he was like, and so the one who had recently died with him was like, no, was trying to explain to him, "Look, this is you, there is no Jesus, like this is it." And the guy was like, "No, leave him there. I'll get him on the next round." And so they walked away. He walked away with the ancestor to go into his next experience. And yet the one who was waiting for Jesus was left there still waiting for Jesus. And the spiritual realm doesn't have time. So who knows how long, if his soul will be stuck there for eternities. And the thing I was mentioning about death earlier, about how when we get to a certain level spiritually, when someone is leaving their body, they can leave some of the material gifts that they've worked on. The gift of kindness, the gift of, children, the gift of being able to work with women, whatever powers they've developed, they can delegate them then. Or if you do a special ceremony, which is still done by some indigenous communities, there's an exchange that happens. But it's not a time to cry, beloveds. That crying and that pain shows the distortion that your mind is in about what is going on. And sometimes people feel that pain because you never even got to know that person when they were living. But it's like the seasons and the times that are coming demand that we start to see life and death from a totally different, elevated perspective. We are spiritual and mental beings having this human experience. And there are those beloveds who don't die, who are able to vibrate this physical vehicle until it becomes like ether and they move with it. And there are also those in hiding, beloveds, who have been living for thousands of years. I'm not joking, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years, waiting for such a time as this to see the great outcome, using their vibration and their energy to hold down Mother Earth until there was this return, which we're witnessing, the great return of the gods. Until next time, Tuko Pamoja.